I mean, I guess my first question would be kind of like where your career started. What was the origin for how you got into experiential education and where you want to go, kind of moving down the road?
Great. So, I mean, my interest in science was originally from more of a communications and education side. I was very interested in biology in high school, and I never really felt like I would be great in a lab or doing the same amount of research my whole life. So I thought that I would kind of use my interest in science and my skills in writing and in public speaking to fill a science communication role. Originally, the goal was to be a science journalist. And I went to Boston University. I double majored in journalism and in ecology and conservation biology. And that's when I got the opportunity to go down to Ecuador, to the Galapagos Islands, and to do some traditional research, in the Amazon. And it was there that I had a project where I examined the kind of disconnect between the children who lived in Ecuador and their knowledge of their own natural ecosystem. So what was my first, I guess, kind of communications project was just visiting the school and doing a PowerPoint presentation for the kids and an activity so they could learn about what was in their own backyard. I then got an internship at Disney's Animal Kingdom, where I worked as a conservation education presenter, primarily with those who were Spanish or Portuguese speaking. And, I really loved that experience. And I was finding that education, I always kind of strayed away from a career in education because my mother was a teacher. And I had always grown up seeing it, but it was never really something I thought that I was going to grow up to do. I wanted kind of a different lifestyle. And I just found that I really had a passion for it. And that communication can be, writing a story, or it can be giving a speech in front of people, but communication is two-way. And so education was really a great opportunity to kind of find out where people are, to get to understand their points of view, and to find different ways to relate complex topics, particularly to people who didn't have English as their first language or who were of younger ages. So after I graduated, I did pursue that science journalism field. I actually worked in the Virgin Islands as a reporter for about 6 months. And the trouble I was finding was that I was doing communication, but I wasn't really giving anybody any action items. As a journalist, you have to be relatively unbiased, and I felt like I was doing a lot of reporting on problems, and particularly environmental problems and health and medical problems. I was there when the Zika epidemic broke out, and was the main reporter on that. And I really felt like I could do more and I could help people understand what they could do. And I mean, I guess for me, a big part of the education, I've just been constantly educating myself too. After the Virgin Islands, I went down to the Environmental Protection Agency, and I worked for the Health and Human Health Risk Assessment Division. So essentially, it was reporting on the research scientists had done on different chemicals, their impacts on human health and on the environmental health, and turning those like 96 reports into digestible fact sheets for people to understand, and to kind of explain, like, this is where the Clean Air Act amendments limits come from, and that kind of thing. We did a little bit of social media, and I really enjoyed that too, because it was a way to talk about a passion that I had. But it still kind of wasn't enough, because giving people information about what they could do, or about how the government came to these policies, didn't necessarily give people a way to participate back in. It didn't tell people, like, here's how to talk to your senator, or did you know you could even attend one of these public meetings? Did you know where to look for an announcement that a new chemical was being produced? And so there I went to environmental law. I did my master's of environmental law from Vermont Law School. I did that online while I was working at EPA. And I focused a lot on wildlife law because that was my area of interest. I did a project about North Carolina's red wolf population that would be like presented at a town hall kind of thing. And I did a kind of interactive webpage about wildlife trafficking and how you might be able to go ahead to pick good pets. So, you know, I've always loved animals very much. And at DC, I was volunteering at the National Zoo doing zoo tours there as well, just like very similar to the work I had been doing at Disney. And a position opened up at the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So that's where I went after my contract with EPA ended. It was a 1-year position. And at the association, I was taking on more of a public relations kind of role. And there was an aspect of conservation education and encouraging people to, you know, donate to their local zoo or aquarium, or to take conservation action to, you know, create a butterfly habitat in their backyard. We had just launched the SAFE program.
I was about to say, this is just when SAFE launched, right?
Yeah. It was a lot of the African penguin and vaquita are the two big things we started with. So my first big project was a Kickstarter fundraiser to raise money for the African penguin, and trying to figure out how we could get our CEO on news shows and featured in news articles, and kind of raise some social media awareness about what we were doing. That ended up being really, really great, really successful. There was also kind of an aspect of public education when it came to opinion research about how they felt about zoos. Part of what we really had to get across was, before you can tell people about conservation or science or what they should be doing, you kind of have to first build that relationship with people and their local zoo and establish that as a place of trust. And that was, I feel like, where we got into people's heads, you know, and kind of ask them, like, what are your thoughts? What are your misconceptions? And then using communication and education and evidence to kind of confront those misconceptions.
It feels like there's a lot of like building pieces, right? You've taken a bunch of little skill sets from each different facet. I mean, it sounds like you're doing a lot of experiential education with always that in the back of your mind. How do we drive an action forward, right? Instead of just presenting evidence or information, how are we taking that next step into something actionable?
Definitely.
Which is experiential education 101, sure.
Definitely. And a lot of it, especially with the advent of social media, is kind of analyzing how our messages are working and how people are responding. You know, we'll go by the likes or the shares or the actions that people take to identify, hey, these are the pictures that work. These are the words that work. These are the types of messages that work. Or these are the places where people who are looking to target to bring this education to are going to look for information. So it is very much, you know, learning from your audience base. And it's also a great way for them to ask questions as well. You know, and the great thing about social media is, I think, unlike with a more traditional kind of education program where you're looking maybe for a longer term curriculum, this is instant feedback on what you're doing.
Taking all those little bits and pieces, you know, takes a lot of ambition. You know, it takes a whole lot. It takes somebody who has drive to see all those connections and put them together. And I absolutely love that you've been able to do so much from this basis of, I want to learn, and I want to give that learning back. I think that's absolutely amazing. So I think I would love to know who some of your inspirations were, who some of your, you know, maybe your journalistic inspirations, whose articles maybe you read, or what article maybe you read that said, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to do something that's like this, or someone else in the field that pushed you towards what you do now, or just those ambitious drives?
Sure. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of my inspiration came from the people that I was working with, and from the kids that I talked to, or from the families that were from other countries who didn't really speak English very well, and just kind of their appreciation and their interest when somebody approached them and when somebody talked to them. And it kind of made me feel like, well, what else can I do to help these people? There was a lot of this at Disney. It was kind of like, you might see a family walking around in a still, and like no one's really talked to them or given them the best experience. And you go up and say hi, and like instantly their day is made better. And they want to learn more now about the animal that you're talking about. And now they might not necessarily have the means to understand in America how those kind of like conservation laws work, or how they can take conservation action at home for an animal who might not live there. And so there's really a ability to reach out and to target people, or not target people, to reach out and kind of provide people the additional information that they need. And then they are very happy and interested and excited to receive it. I think, working in Ecuador was definitely really eye-opening too. I mean, it was an education system that was not necessarily what I was used to around here, and they didn't necessarily have the same activities that we would have done. Like environmental education just wasn't a part of their curriculum, and it's just kind of like opening that new window for people and seeing how interested they were in it. I mean, I imagine a lot of that did probably come from my mom and her work as a teacher, although I didn't realize it until a little bit later. And honestly, like, I think a big part of the interest in science too came from my dad. He grew up along the beach in Massachusetts, and I can remember I never really saw my dad cry at anything. But there was an oil spill at the beach near where he had spent time as a teenager. And we went and visited, and there were still little like oil remnants on the shells. And he just like, it was the first time I had seen my dad cry. And I didn't want anybody else to kind of feel that way.
Yeah.
And I wanted to tell people the story that, this kind of affects everyone. And even though you might not see it, there is a personal connection between, what we see going on in the world and us today. And a lot of people, I think, aren't necessarily cognizant of that, or they don't take the effort to make that connection for themselves. And the role of education has kind of been to make that connection. And then when people do make it and they do realize it for themselves, they're like, what? Wow. And I think that is very, very influential. I mean, I've also been inspired too by people who I've worked with from the education side, who are very passionate about their particular maybe species that they study. I think this is true with scientists too. A lot of them get very into their research. They're like, I love learning about like chlorofluorocarbons, and nobody else really does. But like their passion emanates, and it makes you want to learn more about that topic. So I mean, I think like even with the animals, a lot of animals that I've kind of specialized in now or consider my favorites, like it's largely because I worked with other people or scientists who focused on that animal. I didn't think of ever work with bats until I was hired at BU to do some volunteer research assistance with a professor who was studying white nose syndrome. And I believe he got in a car accident or a car crash, and he suffered some cognitive damage, but he was still working on his project, and he was still really passionate about bats and, spreading the word to people that they're not scary. They're great for mosquito control and agriculture. And I mean, honestly, I was not into bats before then, but then I found myself commenting on what he would say. Right. And wanting to share that knowledge with other people when I ran into kind of some of the similar misconceptions I used to have on their behalf. So that, I think, Professor was very inspirational.
That's that personal connection that you make with, other people that you connect to environmental issues or to conservation-based issues, right? And that's the beauty of experiential education. It helps us connect intrinsic things to really, heartfelt emotional connections, and that's when real change can occur. So that's so cool to see that you've experienced that. How then, as a journalist or as a reporter or as a social media manager, somebody in the communications field, how do you take your passion and the people that you're working with on specific projects, take their passion and infuse it into your work so that your audience is then able to feel that connection? Because it's really easy, right, when you're having a one-on-one conversation, but through printed or digital, how do you make that happen?
Well, you kind of have to foster a sense of where your audience is at first. You might have people who are kind of interested, but they haven't really thought about the topic, or they haven't made that connection for themselves. And for those people, it's best to start on kind of a very basic level with relating something to a topic that most people can relate to. A kind of standard human experience. Maybe you didn't have the experience of growing up along a beach and the coast like my dad did, but maybe you've been to a beach before. Or maybe you have seen trash on the side of the road before in your neighborhood, and that's bothered you. So kind of being able to take those very specific circumstances and make them larger. I think, like I said, communication is two-way. And so you kind of have to ask people about what their own experiences and validate those experiences too. If you're trying to teach somebody something and they have their own opinions. Zach, I'm just thinking about a time at Disney where I was like working at Animal Kingdom, and a woman came up and asked me what kind of bird the meerkat was. And I was like, I can like argue with this lady about like what a bird versus a meerkat is. But that just wasn't going to get me anywhere. She had this like preconceived notion. So kind of like, now I feel like I'm just going on a rant. Just meeting people where they are and kind of validating their opinions. I think I ended up saying to that lady, like, oh yes, that is a small animal that could be easily mistaken for a bird. Like,
so like, there's a lot of nuance in interpretation.
Right, kind of making them not feel like they're wrong, but having them like realize what the right answer kit is kind of on their own. Nobody wants to be just like told in the face, like, no, that's wrong. You don't understand. It's better if you kind of walk them through and they're like, well, why do you think that? But like, I don't know.
Well, that's why it's the science and also the art of interpretation, right? There's a little bit of, flow that needs to happen from both sides. So that's really cool to see. Very cool.
I also want to add too, I think that when we think about communication, a lot of the times we either think about one-on-one speaking. When I worked as a journalist, I thought largely about writing and articles and blog posts as a way to communicate with people. But there are really unique and different ways to communicate, particularly if the people that you're communicating with do have difficulty reading or difficulty hearing or seeing. One of the recent projects that my current organization has done has been about growing bacteria, but in the shape of different like flowers and artwork pieces. and really showing that science is an art. And on social media, there's the opportunity to use video and graphic design to kind of get across those same messages for someone who might be more attentive to a visual story.
Right.
Or you can even, like make songs about macaws. Like there are lots of different ways to to story tell with people.
Right.
No, that's awesome. Every bit of that is amazing. I love to hear all these different ways that we can reach people. And I think that that's something that relates really well to presenters, right? Find that common ground and expand on it. Use that to help this individual. Use that to help move forward. And I just think that that's amazing. It's one more way that a presenter skill continues to help throughout a career.
Yeah, I mean, I think before I had the job as a presenter, if I had met someone and I was trying to convey something to them and they didn't necessarily, and there was a barrier there, be it like a language barrier or a verbal barrier, an audio barrier, I might just kind of write off, well, I'm not going to try to initiate that communication because it's going to be difficult, or because they're not going to understand me anyway. And my experience as a education presenter at Disney, just working with the people from different countries, even just working with people and gradually transitioning to other groups. Like I had already spoken a little bit of Spanish, and I found once I spoke a little Spanish, I could use words that were similar in Portuguese to explain other concepts. And once I understood that combination of maybe pictures or an animal artifact and words would work, then for people who maybe spoke, Chinese or Japanese, which I didn't know any of, for them, I knew how I could do it with just pictures and tactile objects. So it really kind of built on each other. And now, if I encounter someone who has a different kind of barrier, like maybe they can't hear what I'm saying, now I know I can use that picture and that artifact. So there's kind of different methods of teaching you can use in your toolbox to get ready for when one of those unexpected scenarios pops up.
Oh, cool. That's so awesome that we're able to take all these different concepts from, frontlines interpretation to reporting to social media management and continue that thread of storytelling throughout all of them, right? And I think that's one of my biggest takeaways from our chat today is that storytelling. And I'm excited to see where you continue to take that in the future, Ashley. It's been great catching up.
Yeah,